Hi everybody, I'm Bill Sanders and this is Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection. Today what I'd like to talk about is something that is, is always risky, and this is a watch ranking system. Now, the reason for having a watch ranking system is because it provides a guide. It's something like a buying guide in this respect. If you pay for a lot of money for a watch, you want to get your money's worth. These watches are very expensive. If you pay $5,000 or $6,000, for example, for a watch, you got to be able to get a decent, strong horology watch, or even a pre-owned something from High Horology. But if you don't know what where the watch brand and also the individual watch, where it lies in terms of some kind of ranking, you may not know. Now this is more so true for beginners, but it's sometimes we'll find a watch that we haven't heard of before, and wonder what it is. Now the differences between the different ranking levels, the four tiers that there are, instead of being a solid line, it's a gradation. And so if you think of it that way, I think it's more helpful because there's a lot of I guess like your snow on your TV set sometimes. It's just a little hazy in between the different levels. All right, so let's take a look at these: the exceptional horology, high horology, strong horology, and standard horology. And we're going to start with standard horology. And like the name implies, these are, and again, all of these are mechanical watches. These are watches that they're standard. There doesn't mean they can't be very nice looking. But in terms of horology, in other words, the movements and so forth, they're fairly standard. Now, most of these watches have a movement that was made by somebody other than the company that's selling them. In other words, if you buy a watch, for example, by Bell and Ross, the movement is likely to be by ETA or Salida or some other company that makes mass produces movements for it and anybody else who wants to buy it. So the one that I have shown there is Jean Richard. And this watch is an interesting one because they do have one in-house movement. In other words, Jean Richard makes one, they do make a movement, but most of their watches use somebody else's. Now, when a watch company that is in the standard horology group starts making its own movements, it's positioned to begin to move up. And I think Jean Richard is one of those companies. Maurice Lacroix is another one. They have several movements that they make. Most of the ones that they have, I think, are still using outhouse movements, you might call them, or non-in-house movements. Moulet Glashütte, they have some very good movements that they make themselves. Not a lot of them, and they sort of have like a little subculture of really decent watches in terms of compared to a standard horology, a one that they make themselves. And I think there's another one that's positioned to move up. Now, other ones like Raymond Weil, they've been around since the 70s, and they started up shortly after the what's known as the quartz crisis, and they never had seemed to have any intention of using anything but movements that some other company made. In other words, they would buy a lot of movements from, let's say, ETA and for relatively inexpensive movements and make the watches with those movements. And so essentially they're case and dial makers and designers, and they put these other movements in their watches. I have one. I have a Raymond Weil. I use it for yard work now, but I've had it for 30 years, and Yeah, it was my main watch for a while before I knew a lot about watch collection. And some of these others you'll see here, they're like I said, now these watches, under $1,000 is to me about where they belong. Some of them I know they want a lot more for them, but if they have a cheap movement in it, I can't see why. Another one is sort of interesting now is Bowman Mercier. They have come out with their first in-house movement. Now, when I say first, this company is a very old one. I mean, they go way back, and yet they've been bought and sold, and I think they're now owned by the Richemont Group, and they have everybody has their positions based on the cost of the watch, what they sell them for, and sort of their relative worth. I know some people consider them to be high horology, but they're not. At least they're not yet. Now they change things. One of my favorite is Bell and Ross because they have watches that look like airplane panels I used to fly, or instrument panels on airplanes. But they're standard horology. Um, Now let's look at the next group. This is a strong horology, and more than any other watch brand, I think probably Rolex characterizes it. They have a very good movement. It's fairly plain, not too exciting, but it works well. They last long. They have excellent support system. And Rolex, and of course they have their reputation is a sterling one. Other ones like Tudor, they are sort of a subset of they're owned by Rolex, and they were supposed to be the more economical one. And recently, they started making their own movements, and they started winning a lot of Grand Prix prizes. So they've moved from standard up into strong horology. Now, most of these movements have a combination. Rolex doesn't, Zenith doesn't, but most of the other ones, for example, IWC, some of their movements are ETA movements, or the ones they own, like Valjoux. Same with Breitling and a lot of others, Panerai, Hermes, and Mont Blanc have been acting like they really want to move up into high horology. Hermes purchased 20% of Lasher, which makes outstanding movements there. Now, this is where you can have a high horology, even exceptional horology, probably in some cases, with a non-in-house movement, because Lasher movements are so good and they're expensive too. I mean, you're not going to pick one of those up for $100 or whatever they pay for your ETA. Those are going to cost you a lot more than that. Not you, but the manufacturer who puts them in their watches. And they make excellent watches. El Leroy used to use them at one time, and some other ones use them as well. And they're really excellent movements. Okay. The one that I have shown there is Arnold and Son. I simply liked it. They have some of their own in-house movements. It's an English company, and I thought that was sort of cool. All right, now let's take a look at high horology. And then high horology, you have the sort of characterized by the Holy Trinity, made up of Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin, and Audemars Piguet. These three companies have excellent finishing. They have very high quality movements in them. They're very special watches. And if you look at the back of one, and you can see the movement, you'll see that the engraving and very, very nice perlage and Geneva waves and things like that. A. Long and Son they have this wonderful engraving on parts of their movements. The the ones in Glashütte Original, another German company, they do the same thing on their higher end watches, the ones they consider toward high horology. Parmigiani Fourier, here's one of mine that is, oops, you can't even see it in this light. The what they have done now, they had a round movement with a tornado-shaped case, and what they did is when they updated it, they redid the entire movement and they made it in the shape of the case, which is what you'll see in your best watches. Shown right there is a Chopard with a LUC movement in it, where the little LUC is, I think they're the initials of the original Chopard. And they have a series of watches that are in that, and this year they won the Aiguille d'Or, which is the highest, the grand prize that the Grand Prix de Horology de Genève gives out. So anyway, these are some examples of high horology. Now, the top tier is called, I call it, the exceptional horology. They have names like luxury and ultra luxury and super luxury. I tried to give them names that have something about them. Here you have you can take any one of the other companies that we've looked at, and their annual production is probably more than what all of these companies together do. They have one of the characteristics is that they tend to have very low production. FP Journe, for example, which I have my FP Journe. Again, this light is hard to see. Let's see if I can change the light. Never mind. Anyway, the FP Journe is, they make, I think, about 900 watches a year. Now, this is of all models, and there's not a lot of them. The same is true with companies like Beauvais. See if this says any better. No, it's hard to see. But anyway, what Beauvais does is that they have noticed that the movement is sort of hard to see again. The movement fits the case, whereas some of the other ones, like the my Parmigiani, it's a great in-house movement, and it's a lot of attention to it. But still, it doesn't fit the case. But the fact that when they updated it, they put in something that did. All of these, not all of them, but most of them are associated with one person or a couple people who are world-class watchmakers. F.P. Journe, Kerry Voutilanen, Richard Millier, Roger Smith, all of these are associated with it. Now, some of them, like Louis Moignet, is named after the original founder of the company. Same thing with Beauvais. But what they did is that they took the ones that took the name of one of the original founder or had it all along. What they have done is that they have kept the same quality by getting people who can do that level of work. Okay, now, like I said, by the way, the one that is shown there has quite a few complications. It has, I think I was going to say a bi-retrograde. Looking at it, I think it's got a tri-retrograde at the top up there. There's also retrograde plus just a really finely done watch by Lang and Haney, one of my favorite companies. And these watches are, if you have a watch from here, from this top tier, you can expect to pay a lot of money. Well, like I said, maybe you run into one in a pawn shop or somewhere where you don't realize how much they're worth. The purpose, again, is to help you make the buying decision. If you see a watch that is sort of if you look at this and say, hey, wait a minute, these guys are asking a lot for that watch and it's at a fairly low tier. This is what it's for. It isn't for bragging rights because someone's always going to have a better collection than you have. I know a lot of people who have really outshine anything I have, but that's not the purpose of watch collecting. It's because you enjoy the watches that you have. But at the same time, you don't want to pay more than you should, and you want to see if you can find a bargain somewhere. So anyway, that's the purpose of having a ranking system. As usual, I'd love to hear your comments that you might have about this on the comments section. And Sunday we'll have our next video. Hope to see you then. In the meantime, this is Bill Sanders for Watch Art Sci, the art and science of watch collection.